त्यागीश्वर हे नर वर त्यागीश्वर हे नर वर देह पदे निर्भय गत संशय दृढ निश्चय मानस वाक् निष्कारण भक्त शरण निष्कारण भक्त शरण त्याजे जाते कुलमा संपद तव श्रीपाद भव पुष्पद वारि यथा प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुख जा संपद तव श्रीपद भव पुष्पद वारि यथा प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुख जा नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनादित नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनादित मनोवचनैकाधार प्रभु मनोवचनैकाधार ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वल रुदिकन्द ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वल रुदिकन्द तुमि तम भञ्जनः प्रभु तुमि तम भञ्जनः नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनादित नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनादित मनोवचनैकाधार प्रभु मनोवचनैकाधार ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वल रुदिकन्दर ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वल रुदिकन्दर तुमि तम भञ्जनः प्रभु तुमि तम भञ्जनः रंग रंग भंगवा ते अंग संगमृदि रंग रंग भंगवा जे अंग संगम गायचे छंद भगत वृंद आरती तोमा गायचे छंद भगत वृंद आरती तुम जय जय आरती तुम हर हर आरती तुम शिव शिव आरती तोमा गुरु महाराज जी की जय। ओम ह्रीं ह्रीतं त्वमचलो गुणजीत गुणेढ्या नक्तं दिवं सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहं कषं बहुकृतं न भजे यतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छं चलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदमे न च भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ति तरसा त्वयि तृप्ततृष्णा रागे कृते हृतपथे त्वयि राम कृष्णे मत्यमृतं तव पदं मरणोन्मिनाशं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारी श्नान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नाम नाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। सर्वमंगल मांगल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थ साधिके शरण्ये त्र्यंबके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टि स्थिति विनाशानां शक्ति भूते सनातनी गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणी नमोस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्व शान्ति हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय 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 महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
Hello, check. Namashi Atirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swami Netavaharine. So, last time, which is 2 weeks back, what we had pointed out was that the answer to these fundamental questions about ontological, epistemological, what does it mean for one to exist, for something to exist, what does it mean for us to know something to be true? The answer to these fairly fundamental questions, the answer was not given in terms of some kind of speculative philosophy or definitive answer, but rather a method to inquire. A method to inquire. This method has various names, and largely it's what is called in the Vedanta literature Viveka, analysis, discrimination. And this method culminates in something that satisfies the enquirer. See, we hear all these words, Shunya from Buddhists, Atman or Brahman from Vedantists, God from people who are more theistically inclined. And the words leave us unsatisfied because the subjective content of this, the meaning does not flash. So this is really the reason why, in spite of hearing various answers from various schools of speculative philosophy, we remain dissatisfied. So the real answer is given in terms of a method of enquiry rather than a definitive answer forming the framework of some speculative school of philosophy. Yeah? Basically, the idea being that the individual enquirer, if he or she is sincere enough and really wants to know the answer to the question that is being posed, is going to keep on inquiring, following some broad guidelines which are provided, and then arrive at a solution oneself. The emphasis is then on the method, enquiry. This is some capacity that all of us have. It's given this word enquiry. It appears in different garbs in various different Upanishads. And one of them, which is very often misunderstood, is this passage from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Somebody had asked, it would be good to have some discussion on the method which is prescribed as an answer to these fundamental questions. And I'll just illustrate this and say what it means, because giving a detailed discussion of what various methods are is going to take us very far afield. But I'll give one illustration. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, Sa esha neti neti atma, na iti atma. So na iti literally translates to not this. Does it mean that if one is trying to inquire into the truth and one is looking at this laptop in front of me, this light in front of me, this room in front of me, and we keep on saying, oh, not the light, not this room, not this laptop? That's not what the connotation of this expression is. It's a cryptic expression. And what it is supposed to evoke is the core of the inquiring spirit. What does that mean? Just add in one English word. The words not this in English, somehow we keep repeating it without grasping the content. But if you just introduced one word in the middle, not just this, it expresses the sentiment that there is something deeper underlying what we are seeing, what we are experiencing, and it comes fueled by this desire to know the underlying truth. This is what captures the spirit of Sayesha Neti Neti Atma. When we say Neti Neti, we really mean not just this. In a different place, Shankara has this hymn or some poem where he uses this word atah kim, atah kim. What next? What next? This particular, the words are different, atah kim and neti neti. But the subjective feeling, the subjective spirit of inquiry that both phrases encapsulate is the same. Two things. First, the surface reality that we are seeing is not adequate enough to satisfy our urge or desire for truth. That's what Neti Neti really connotes. So the fuel is this desire for the truth, clarity. The other is, it's just once you have fuel, it's basically the mind tries to penetrate through the superficial reality, through the surface reality, into something which is deeper and contained in it. This is the spirit of inquiry. The Brahma Sutras start with this one single sutra, Atha Atha Brahma Jigyasa. The core word there is this Jigyasa. Two connotations. Jigyasa literally means Jnatum Ichha, desire to know. Desire to know what? Desire to know the truth. And the popular connotation of fundamental desires of themselves. The Madhyamika school, which really is a mirror of Advaita Vedanta. There is no real substantial difference. So there, I would refer to you to that text, and essentially, so this what they do is exactly analyze the mind and say, look, these are what are called kleshas. These are things which offer pain to us. What we are seeking is joy, and these are the obstructions to it. Then understanding it in a certain framework gives you a certain universal framework without any cluttering of what society one is born in. These are certain universal aspects of the human mind, and then methods of alleviating those things. Yeah, so I'll just again give you one example, because these are universal. I mentioned this expression, universal laws of the mind. So I'll just give you one illustration. So in the Yoga Sutras, it's called Pratipaksha Bhavanam. So for example, the feeling of hatred or anger towards an individual to be countered by a certain feeling of mercy. So there are various mudita, karuna, upekshanam. Yeah, so these are some words that are there. So basically, these are things that give us subjective pain, which means basically conditionings of the mind, and their counter effects, the medicines that we have to apply. But each of these things are psychological things, so we have to analyze, understand our own psychology. This framework gives you some kind of a universal framework or universal set of laws that guide these subjective feelings, and what other feelings that we need to cultivate in order to counter that. Yeah, that's all that is involved. Okay. So this answers two of the questions that were raised. One is what are instances of universal laws? Second, is there something more basic behind all these fundamental philosophical questions that are raised in the Upanishads, and in this particular case, in Vivekananda's this particular lecture, Maya and Freedom, he raises this: in what does the universe, from where does it arise, in what does it rest, and where does it dissolve? So, so these were questions that were raised, and where do these questions arise from? And really, it boils. It's not that the same set of questions are going to arise in everybody's mind. So we had mentioned this thing without saying the Sanskrit last time. Kasminnu bhagavo vignate sarvamidam vignatam bhavati iti. Yeah, so that's from the Mundak. Basically asking, what is the core of knowledge? Yeah? Knowing what indeed is all this known. This is really inquiring into the fundamental principle of knowledge that is there in each of us. So really, it's first asking oneself, what is it that I really want to know? Once that question becomes clear in one's mind, it is going to guide the process of inquiry. That adds the direction to the inquiry. It need not be in any of the words that come up in the Upanishads, but it's a personal inquiry. and a personal inquiry has to be done. These provide various frameworks, and it allows you to proceed. But first, identify the question that you would like to know an answer to above all. This is what jigyasa is about. And then proceed to inquire by focusing and training the mind towards getting an answer to that question. All right, that answers two of the questions and a partial answer to another question that was raised, namely methodology. And methodology really is inquiry. There's no more to be said about it. I'll say a little more a little later because it's an answer to yet another question that was raised. There was one more question that was raised, which basically said something like this: isn't subjective consciousness itself caught within the larger framework of time? And the answer to that is, look, the answer to that can be given in terms of a question. When do you ask this question? So, for example, each night we go off to sleep. In the dream world, we have a certain concept of time which does not match with the time that we see in our waking state. Then there is a phase of sleep, so-called deep sleep, where there are no dreams. There are no mental waves. Where is the notion of time then? So is really conscious, so it boils, so the question really in response to that question that was asked is, what do you mean by consciousness? Do you mean just this conscious state? Or do you mean the faculty that makes us aware, that faculty that leads to attention? If that be the case, then the framework of time is not a larger framework. Time emerges in our thinking. If a person is under coma, do you think that person has any sense of time? Very likely not. Those who have been anesthetized, they certainly have no sense of time. When they come out, this is a standard thing that this again has some Sanskrit. Sukha maham aswapsam na kinchit avedisham. I was sound asleep. I did not know anything. In particular, I had no sense of time. It is when we agree to measure the distance between two events by something like a clock, which could be a sophisticated clock, but a clock nevertheless, then the notion of time appears. So the framework of time is not a larger framework from the point of view of this consciousness. Yeah. So essentially, the idea behind all these discussions is to get at a process of inquiry into what does consciousness mean. And this brings me to the answer to this other question that was asked, method. And we have talked about this method several times here. Let me reassert it. If you are trying to be fully aware of the present moment, without allowing the mind to get fractured and take you off on some journey of its own, then you are exerting this faculty of awareness, full awareness of the moment. of the present moment. The past and the future are things that exist. So basically the idea here is that the past and the future exist in our minds. It is to become aware of that. If one is aware, then subjectively, time emerges from our consciousness as the method of interpreting distance between events. Consciousness becomes a more fundamental reality. And the method to catch hold of this basic idea is very simple to say, doing whatever one is doing with full awareness, equivalently with full attention. That's all. Nothing more to it. It gives, in different traditions, this is given different expressions. Vivekananda says, do whatever work you're doing with full attention. That's the method. Nothing more. No more, no less. Once you start practicing that, the mind starts becoming clearer and clearer, and anything one does with greater attention, less clutter of the mind. The Buddhists call this mindfulness. They emphasize awareness. There is no theology, there is no God in that philosophy. So one does whatever one does with full awareness. At this moment, whatever words one is speaking, whatever words one is hearing, one is doing that with awareness. That's it. The theological schools, Christians for instance, talk of this as practice of the presence of God. It's essentially the same practice viewed from three different angles depending on what one's mind is oriented towards. That is the method. Nothing more, nothing less. And we had mentioned this thing from the Kenopanishad, Pratibodha Viditam Matam. Through every act of perception, bodha means perception. In and through every act of perception, there is this conscious spark, which gets obscured in the collection of events that flow, and our minds get cluttered. This idea that time is more fundamental is born of this mind taking over awareness. But we all have this faculty. It's not some mystical thing that one has to hunt for outside, but as the Upanishad says, ihaiva, here itself, now itself. It is in the present moment, it is in the present place that we need to seek an answer. Not in some mystical twilight, not in some hazy situation where there is lack of clarity. But the present moment is the best place to start this inquiry, catching hold of it the best we can. It does not mean that we are going to be fully aware in a moment. It's not going to be happening like that. But this present moment, asking ourselves, what does it mean to be aware at this very moment? Yeah? So, eating, but eating with full awareness. Seeing something with as much care and clarity as possible. Then the notion of time becomes something that is secondary to that, not primary. This assumption that time is a larger framework is an assumption. Challenging that assumption by asking ourselves, really is it so? Or is it my mind which gives me this framework of time? Events, distance between events, we call it time. If time was really fundamental, then we would close our eyes and then look at the clock. We'd be able to say precisely how much the clock has moved, but that's not the case. So the subjective time and this time which is shared by a bunch of people is not the same. So wherein is my subjective notion of time? Asking this question immediately reveals that it's not a fundamental reality. It's our brains that somehow tell us that, look, yeah, we compute and say that, look, there are these events and there is this distance between them. And the distance between these two events, a succession of events, is what we adopt conventionally as time. These questions actually have a very long history. And just today, there's a book which is somewhat technical. It's about quantum computing, but he refers back to this ancient Greek philosopher who's referred to as pre-Socratic, but was really a contemporary of Socrates. Philosopher called Democritus. It's in a book on quantum computing by a computer scientist called Aronson. And apparently he found this reference in another book by a physicist called Schrödinger. But this is a question that goes back, what, 2,500 years or so. And same questions persist today. Democritus basically was the precursor of the present atomic theory of, in some sense, philosophically, the atomic theory of the universe. And he points out this. Through this analysis, through this process of analysis, he says, the intellect starts out saying, by convention, there is sweetness, which means our faculty of taste. By convention, bitterness. By convention, color. In reality, only atoms and the void. This is the process of philosophical inquiry that he had conducted and came to this answer. This is the analytical intellect at work. Then he gives the counterpoint. The senses respond saying, foolish intellect, do you seek to overthrow us while it is from us that you take your evidence? This faculty of enquiry, which is there in the intellect, basically rules out. It basically says that, look, what we are seeing through these senses is false. There is only, at the bottom of it, void and atoms. This was some expression. But the answer to that is given by the senses by saying that, look, we provided you the inputs and now you are saying that our inputs are false. Essentially, so how do we resolve this conflict? So this is again, essentially we are talking about Maya. Essentially, this is the conflict, this little dialogue between an imagined intellect and an imagined bunch of senses really encapsulates that conflict. The sensory data give us raw data. The intellect analyzes and processes it. And then says that the things that we had started off with are not substantial enough. How do we resolve this? So there's some kind of a conflict between the sensory apparatus that gathers data and the intellectual apparatus or the enquiring apparatus that tries to get to the truth of things. The answer can be given in terms of evolution. The senses were basically developed in order to survive, not to make sense of the world or of ourselves. But we as human beings do, for better or worse, have this faculty of enquiry. And it applies itself to our experience in the world. And then, essentially, it says that the point from which we started is not true in and of itself. But then the starting point says, well, we started from there. Some kind of circular paradox in our thinking, in our analysis, seems to emerge. I don't one should not give a definitive answer to this paradox, because really the answer has to be sought by each and every one of us privately. But the process, we see something and that seems to be a datum. But truth, is it something that we see? Or is it something that we have an instinctive or intuitive grasp on? And there are ways and means of affirming or negating an experience. If it were true that every experience is something that is true, then we would not require, we would not say that all that's just some dream, it's not true, it's false. So we have this conflicting mechanism already there in us. Our minds like to think in terms of these antipodes. There is something associated with the physical world, which is our senses. They start by giving data. They do not ascertain the truth of that perception. Then there is something, this principle of knowledge, which collates that data and extracts unifying principles. This extraction of unifying principles is exactly what we call knowledge. From matter, information. This is the first step. Then unifying these pieces of information into cogent ideas, knowledge. And from there, acting on the basis of those, or unifying, basically having some unifying principle behind all of that, something that's a higher faculty, a higher kind of knowledge. This is the way the mind proceeds deeper and deeper. It does not mean that the thing that you started off with, the sense data, are ignored, but it is subjected to this inquiry, this neti neti or atakim atakim. You have the starting data. There is no truth or falsehood about it, but subjecting it to this extra faculty. You start with the data and then you inquire into it. And then training the mind in order to extract from all of that this one thing that distinguishes us as a species, namely knowledge. Yeah? And this urge to truth, urge towards ascertaining truth, being the fuel behind it. We started discussing this, and we did not read part of the passage here. So maybe to conclude, we shall read this passage, because actually in this passage from Vivekananda's Maya and Freedom, essentially the same ideas are expressed. It says, we are all rushing towards freedom. We are all following that voice, whether we know it or not. As the children of the village were attracted by the music of the flute player, so we are all following the music of the voice without knowing it. This urge for freedom, this urge for truth, this urge for knowledge. We are ethical when we follow that voice. Not only the human soul, but all creatures from the lowest to the highest have heard the voice and are rushing towards it. And in the struggle are either combining with each other or pushing each other out of the way. Thus come competition, joys, struggles, life, pleasure, and death. And the whole universe is nothing but the result of this mad struggle to reach the voice. This is the manifestation of nature. So first, identifying for oneself this urge for freedom within one. Two, extrapolating from there and inferring that all beings have the same urge within themselves, they interpret it in different ways and then either come in conflict or cooperate. Yeah? This is what is involved. What happens then once we understand this twofold thing, the subjective process, movement towards freedom? Second, the understanding that all are moving towards it. What happens then? The scene begins to shift. As soon as you know the voice and understand what it is, the whole scene changes. The same world which was the ghastly battlefield of Maya, this bunch of conflicts, this existential facts of conflict, this coexistence of opposites, which conditioned our being, is now changed into something good and beautiful. We no longer curse nature, nor say that the world is horrible and that it is all vain. We need no longer weep and wail. As soon as we understand the voice, we see the reason why this struggle should be here. This fight, this competition, this difficulty, this cruelty, these little pleasures and joys, we see that they are in the nature of things, because without them, there would be no going towards the voice, to attain which we are destined, whether we know it or not. All human life, all nature, therefore, is struggling to attain to freedom. The sun is moving towards the goal, so is the earth encircling round the sun, so is the moon encircling round the earth. To them, to that goal, the planet is moving and the air is blowing. Everything is struggling towards that. The saint is going towards that voice. He cannot help it. It is no glory to him. So is the sinner. The charitable man is going straight towards that voice and cannot be hindered. The miser is also going towards the same destination. The greatest worker of good hears the same voice within, and he cannot resist it. He must go towards the voice. So with the most arrant idler, one stumbles more than another, and him who stumbles more we call bad. Him who stumbles less we call good. Good and bad are never two different things. They are one and the same. The difference is not one of kind, but of degree. I think in this particular paragraph, he gives a resolution. This mind being able to, or at least this awareness being able to see the antipodes of human experience as part and parcel of some common reality. This is what awareness is about. Where the judgmentality of this is good and this is bad, this is something I like and this is something I dislike, this frenzied existence is alleviated by a certain moving back, a certain detachment that comes. This faculty, cultivation of that, is what enquiry is supposed to lead to. We have various names: Viveka, Vairagya, analysis, with the giving up or capacity to detach the mind from the various phenomena conditioning it. These are also subjective faculties of our subjective existence, and perhaps the two aspects of consciousness, attention and awareness, really combined together in terms of these two faculties which need to be cultivated in order to make our inquiry fruitful. Output is essentially these conflicts which were seeming terrible to start off with. Once this more larger perspective, this detachment comes, one sees life and death as obverse and reverse of the same phenomenon. Good and bad being basically aspects of a common ethical reality. The judgmentality decreases. The passion for life and the aversion of fear towards death decreases. So what happens is things that were seeming ghastly to start off with, a ghastly battlefield of conflict, is now alleviated and is seen as a more beautiful, more unified worldview coming into place, where the conflicts of the earlier mind are replaced by a more placid and quiet acceptance of these different antipodes of life as life itself. We'll come back to this for the next couple of weeks. I will not be here. We'll return to this 3 weeks down the line. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna.